So our gospel reading, very quickly as you remain standing, comes from Matthew's gospel, the 5th chapter. This is the Sermon on the Mount. And so he goes through and he says, blessed are this, blessed are this. And then he comes to a part in which he's preaching and teaching in arguably what's the greatest sermon ever. And he says this, and this is picking up with the 13th verse, not the 12th, but the 13th verse. Jesus says, you are the salt of the earth. But if salt loses or has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is of no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. May God add God's blessing to the reading, the hearing, the understanding of God's holy word. Thanks be to God. Amen. You may be seated. So we've been on a journey together. If you're just joining us for the first time after not being here for a couple of weeks, we're working through a sermon series called Scripture Comes Alive. And the idea was to give you something concrete that you could leave here with each and every Sunday. And so we started out by talking about having talents. And everybody was invited to take a talent. And you were encouraged to do something with your talent. The sisters' Sunday school class provided breakfast this morning and raised about $315, I think they said, after they started with $15 worth of from their talents. And so that's just one of examples. In 2 weeks, we will celebrate the culmination of this. 2 weeks ago, you were given seeds, and you were talking about being the seeds of Christ, and you were invited to go and plant and add some beauty to the earth. Last week, you were given the opportunity to take thank you cards and to write thank you notes to those in your lives who needed to be thanked for something. This week, we're going to talk a little bit about being the salt and the light. Being the salt and the light. So this is the story that Jesus, or the sermon that Jesus gives. He tells his disciples, you are the salt of the earth. Now, a lot of people don't really understand that. They don't really know what that means. And so salt back then, it turns out in Jesus' day, was greatly valued because it preserved food. So they didn't have refrigeration like we did. They didn't have something they could just go and throw food in order to keep it from spoiling or going bad. So in essence, the salt was designed to keep things sort of good. The salt was used to keep things good. I think if we keep that in mind for who we are as God's people and what God is calling us to do and to be, then we look at ourselves as being added to the world in order to kind of keep things good. That's a subjective word, of course, because what's good for me may not be good for someone else. What might be desirable for me might be less than desirable for you. So we have to kind of keep that in mind when we think about the common good of how we are to live our lives in such a way that we keep all people, the low, the high, the right, the left, and we keep all in common good. The other thing about salt is that it's common, it's everyday. You know, you go to a restaurant, what are you going to find on the table? You're going to find probably a salt and pepper shaker, right? So it's around every day. It's something that is added to your food to make it a little different, to enrich it. Some of you know this. My wife just returned from the Aspen Food and Wine Festival out in Colorado, so she got invited by her sister to go, and so she came back, and one of the things she was sharing, we've been here eating dinner like every night this week, so she hadn't had a chance to show off her skills that she learned out there. But one of the things she talks about is the fact that condiments, what she learned was that condiments are added to our food in order to bring out a particular flavor to make it taste better. And so the same, if you think about salt, is you add salt to something in order to make the other tastes that already exist kind of pop. Now, I do know a few people who are heavy-handed on the salt and they just like the way it tastes. But the majority of us probably aren't that way. And so we think about salt being added to something to bring out the flavor. It's not about the salt itself. And so we are reminded as Christians, as being the salt of the earth, that we are not, it's not all about me. It's not all about you. It's about being added to the world around us to make that world around us more beautiful. We've seen that in so many ways this past week. I'm carrying around, I have in my office, a bottle of water that's empty. It's an empty bottle of water, and you're going to see it on my shelf from here on out, and you're going to think, that's really strange that he's saving a bottle of water. But what it is for me is that it's a little bit of that saltiness, in that it was one of the bottles that I was given while I've been down visiting Mother Emanuel. Because a variety of people from a variety of different walks of life are just literally handing out free bottles of water because it's so hot down there, and you're being blessed and given a gift by these people, complete strangers. They don't know me. I'm hoping we just recycle all these hundreds of thousands of bottles we're giving out, but that's a whole other entity. It's amazing to see this display of affection, appreciation, and love. Common, ordinary, every day, but it adds something to my life, being down there, being in the midst of these people, being gifted a bottle of water. I mean, that's scriptural. God, when did we see you thirsty and didn't give you something to drink? So there's the idea of being the salt. And so what we're going to invite you to do is, we have one of our members works at Chick-fil-A, and so he brought me a huge, massive box or bag of salt packets. And so here's the thing about salt packet. You can put this in your pocket, and if you forget that it's there and you wash it, your clothes are not going to be harmed, okay? Because that's going to happen to me. Go ahead and admit that. But you're going to be invited to take this salt packet or two. We've got enough. And just keep it in your pocket. And so you're going to run onto it this week. And maybe you get in a situation in which you need salt for your food. So you've got that. Or you can just use it as a reminder of what you're being called to be. So that's the salt part. Well, we didn't want to stop there. So we talked about light. And light is so common. You heard it in Ephesians. Live as the children of the light. You and I are supposed to be children of the light. We're supposed to live a certain way in which that light shines in their lives. Because trust me, friends, others are carrying darkness with them. They're only seeing darkness, and sometimes they have to feel that light. And that's our job. That's our job. To be the light in other people's lives. So there's this beautiful story that is told, and I've seen it a couple of different places, but it's about Robert Louis Stevenson. Does that name sound familiar? He's the author of Treasure Island, classic children's book. And so Robert Louis Stevenson spent his life in Edinburgh, Scotland, his early years in Edinburgh, Scotland in the 19th century. And he was always intrigued as a boy by the lamplighters that would come through the town and would light the lamps that were there. So they would carry a ladder and a torch, and so none of you are old enough to remember this. They would walk through the town, and they would set up their ladder, and they'd climb up and they would light the torch, and it would provide light for the city at night. And so one of these nights, Robert was sitting and looking at the window in fascination by this man walking through town, lighting the lights. And his parents wondered, and they're like, Robert, what are you looking at? What are you staring at out there? And with great excitement, with great anticipation, almost as if he knew that they were going to ask them the question, he said, look at that man. Look at him. He's punching holes in the darkness. As the man would set up his ladder, as he would light a torch, he was punching holes in the darkness. And I have to be very careful how I tell that story to my child, because my 6-year-old would take that literally and he'd start punching holes because he's just that physical. I'm not promoting violence, but that's sort of what we're called to do, is to punch holes in the darkness that is all around us. All around us. We are the light to the world, friends. Salt and light. So we thought about it, and what could we use as a metaphor for us, as something you could take home. And so we thought, listen, we'll just give you candles, and so you can take them home and you can light a candle and you can be reminded. And that would have been good. But I was talking to a friend of mine, and he suggested something a little different. And so I had to order one of these online, because they don't really sell them in stores anymore. You remember these things? A Lite-Brite. Now, if you didn't have one, your kids may have had one. Probably not your grandkids, because these haven't been around these haven't been out for a while. I had one of these growing up. I don't remember it being this small. You can't really see it. I turn the light on, you can't really see it. I don't remember it being this small. Mine was a lot bigger and a lot thicker and a lot heavier, and you had to plug it in. It wasn't operated on batteries or anything like that. And I've designed the little cross that's on here. But the thing about the Lite-Brites was that these little pegs, they have no source of light themselves. So I pull this peg out, and it's just a regular peg. There's no light that is in it at all. It's not until it's plugged in through this little hole in which it has a source of light that can shine through it. See, I think this is the perfect example of what we are called to be. And it's a silly little toy, I know that. But I think this is the perfect example of what we're called to be as disciples. When Jesus said you are to be the light of the world, light to the world, this is what he was talking about. I mean, not the bright light, but that kind of image. You and I have no light apart from God, and so we have to stay plugged in. We have to stay plugged in. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to sing, we're going to take up an offering. I'm going to invite our ushers to come forward and to receive our morning offering. And as we close our worship service, we're going to close with a song that's called I Want to Walk as a Child of the Light. And during the singing of that song, you're invited to come forward. I like for you to come forward. I don't like it when you walk out and have to grab something. I want to invite you to come forward as you feel led. You don't have to come. But there's a chalice that's got Lite-Brite pegs in it, and a basket that has salt packets. And so I want you to grab one or a couple of salt packets and one or two of the Lite-Brite pegs. And I want you to keep these in your pocket to remind you that you are called to be the light of the world. They're sort of sharp, because they have to be poked in. And so odds are, if you keep it in your pocket, at some point you're going to go reach for your keys and it's going to poke you. That's okay too. That's a good reminder. Right? That you and I together are called to be salt and light. And we add so much to the world when we live into that. Amen?